Welcome back to the program. Around the table, Jeff Marek, Anthony Stewart, Justin Bourne, and Jason Farris, who's the author of a new book, former NHL executive as well, called It Takes 23 to Win, which is, first of all, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks so much for coming by. I described your previous book, the general manager's book, Behind the Moves, as catnip for hockey fans. I'm not sure how I'm going to describe this one other than it's a fascinating take on an age-old idea. We've all put together what we think are championship teams, load it up with, all-stars. Hey, look, I've got Rocket Richard playing on my third line. But this new book, It Takes 23 to Win, Jason, your words better than mine, has a little twist to that one and has ex-hockey players and current hockey players as well involved in this process.
Correct. I picked 23 players, each at the 23 roster position. So I've got Frank Mahovlich as a left winger on the first line, for instance, but then I've got Terry Ruskowski on the fourth line. So I picked 23 players across, the last 50 years, and then went to them and had each of them choose a 23-man lineup, but I gave them some constraints because I don't want just an all-star team. I want a real team of players. So I gave them the constraint of a salary cap by basically saying you have to pick a guy at the position he played when you played with him. Okay?
You're such a new NHL executive.
Yeah.
He's got to come with a cap. This is fantasy time, Jason.
No.
Come on, caps don't exist.
Well, but you get some interesting names on these lists. So that was sort of how we did the forced salary cap. The second thing was kind of a realm of free agency, which is everyone's not available to you. You might have played in Detroit and had some great players. You can't load up. You got to pick one guy off of each team you played on, each year you played in the league. And each of the players, have played over 500 games and for 4 different teams. So you've got nice diversity of the teams. And they had to reserve a spot for themselves. So that created the team I picked. That was team 1, plus 23 teams that spawned. We had 24 teams. We put them into a little league called the Player Picked Hockey League. Terry Crisp is one of only 2 guys that's won a cup as a player and a general manager since 1967. Yeah. He took all those teams blind, and we put him into kind of a play-down series, and he handicaps it all, and we actually presented a game, a game program, vintage style of that final series. So it's a lot of fun, and it gives players an opportunity to go into their mental database of players, choose from the 200 to 300 players that each of them sat in dressing rooms with, pick out 23, talk a little bit about what was exemplary about them, what they brought to the dressing room, what was unique about them. And I think it's a kind of a really neat way into the dressing room and into the minds of players.
So with the 23-man roster, there's 2 players that don't play on a nightly basis. How important are those 2 guys that don't hit the ice every night, to building a winning team?
Well, and I think the answer is very important. And those guys can't be sour guys. As you know, they got to be upbeat all the time, even though they may be going through a real tough time. Maybe they're on the downside of their career. Maybe they're just kind of hanging on, right? It may be a bit too much to say that those guys are glue guys if they're not on the ice a lot, but they certainly have to be positive in the dressing room. And really a big part of the impetus for this book for me was I'm not just interested in the star goaltender. Dominic Hasek is the player, the first-line goaltender that I've chosen here that's involved in the book. But I'm interested in the backup goalie. I'm interested in the third pair defenseman. I'm interested in the fourth line forward, right? So and those 13th and 14th forwards, the 7th defenseman, are really important guys. So we've got Bobby Baston and Vern Fiddler as the 13th and 14th forward, and an old guy from way back when, Nick Beverly, as the 7th defenseman. So, but they provide an interesting take, and those are roles that they played, and so they can truly talk about their perspective of being on a team, contributing to a team, and viewing a team from that perspective.
You know what I love about this one? What I love about this concept, I've long believed, and you guys know this as ex-players, you can't lie to players. No, honestly, you can't lie to hockey players. Hockey players know who's good and who's not. Hockey players know who belongs. When you guys are playing on a team, you guys know who belongs here. You guys know who's getting force-fed ice time. You know who's the pet and who's getting showcased. You cannot lie to hockey players, which is why I love that this is primarily put together by all these guys. And the one that I paused on when I'm like, yes, someone finally gives me bite. I don't know if you and I have ever had the Joe Meloche discussion.
Love Joe Meloche.
Well, Terry Ruskowski, right, puts Joe Meloche as his goaltender. I've always maintained that Joe Meloche was the greatest goaltender that got stuck on bad teams. California, Cleveland, a really bad Minnesota North Stars team. I still maintain that through the 70s, if Gilles Meloche had have played on the Bruins, Habs, Islanders, any of these teams, he would be in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Agree or disagree? Because Terry Ruskowski, I'm glad he did it, puts Gilles Meloche as one of his goaltenders.
Yes, and I don't know about the Hall of Fame. Gilles Meloche is a great goaltender. There were a lot of good goaltenders through the 70s. I'm a Cesar Maniego guy, as you know. I did a book with him years back.
Deep crouch guy.
You know, he went to, what was it, game 7 of the semifinals, lost in double overtime.
Yeah.
Had he gone on to the playoffs, would he have been the Conn Smythe winner rather than Glenn Hall? You know, it's lots of shoulda, coulda, wouldas, but count me as a Gilles Meloche lover for sure. So,
But not as strong as you're not saying Hall of Fame. Like,
I don't know about that. We'll see.
Man, he was good, though.
Yeah, he was. Well, he got the North Stars to that Cup final, too.
Totally.
In 81, so, yeah.
I want to know if you think that players do, in fact, know who good players are. Because you've been a hockey executive before.
Yeah.
And so there is a perspective that comes from that booth, I guess, that's different from the players in the room. So when these players went and picked their teams, did the executive in you say, these guys know what they're doing? Or was it like, oh, man, they just like the rough and tumble types? Or...
No. Well, so first of all, you
These
find
are all
out
their buddies.
there is a GM in every player, for sure.
Is there a good one is the question.
Well, I think that there's some that are, lean to buds and whatnot. And I don't think that's just true in retirement, but I think that's true at the time. They like to assemble a group of their buddies. And is that really the right group? Maybe not. But this thing, what these teams force and what you learn from that is each team that they've picked it's a reflection of three things. It's first a reflection of the era they played in, right? So like you say, the teams from the 70s and 80s, Bobby Schmotz picked up pretty tough, mean team. Stan Jonathan is front and center, right? So that's a tough team versus, a guy like Ray Whitney who played maybe just a couple of years ago, right? So it's a reflection of the era. It's a reflection of the teams that player played on. How deep is the talent? Dennis Maruk was a great player, scored 60 goals, played on a lot of really bad hockey teams, right? Mm-hmm. So how quickly does it thin out in terms of who he's got to choose from? And then the last thing, it's a reflection of the player himself and what he values. And so that kind of gets to what you're saying. So I would say, not all players are cut out to be GMs. No way. But there's some guys, on here, like I mentioned Ray Whitney. I mean, Wizard's a terrific guy and whatnot. Some of these people I had to kind of work through picking their teams, and we went through all the lists and whatnot. Ray went away and spent 4 hours on it all by himself and came back. He had it, like he's been thinking about this for a long time. Yeah. And he needed the constraints I gave him to force him to make some decisions. And it's really interesting to see the balance that he's got on his team.
Yeah. There are some that you understand. Like I just on Brad Marsh's page here, and Marsh, so he picks that blue line from the 87 team. That is him in Philadelphia. So Doug Crossman, Mark Howe, and Brad McCrimmon, Beast, late, who is one of the more underrated players. Whenever you need it, when you're breaking in a kid, look what Detroit did with Nicholas. First thing you can do when they bring him over is they put him with Brad McCrimmon. So you understand that, like that defense, one of the more underrated blue lines, in this or any other generation in hockey. But which were the surprises for you? Like when you got the teams back from all these players, did you say, "Oh, that's"?
Well, we
did a little bit of an eyebrow.
Other than Ray and maybe one other, we really did them together because, again, it's starting with probably 300 names over a 20-year career. And most of these guys, a lot of the fun they had was, honestly, I hadn't thought about a lot of these names for a while. And so I would give them a list of, here are the 20 first-line centers you played with year by year. Here are the 20, fourth-line wingers, right? And so, but as we started ticking them off, they could only take one guy off of each year. So it started shrinking it down, and then they had to play with the jigsaw puzzle, right? So, there are many guys that I'm sure these guys left on the cutting room floor that they would have liked. So I wouldn't say there was any real surprises. I mean, there's names of guys that, like how valuable Wendell Clark was, and like he shows up in a bunch of places, and so just guys like that. There's names out there of players that were either glue guys, that just that are really revered that you kind of wouldn't think, wow, but they stuck out with a player.
How long did the book take to write, and did anyone decline to do it just out of fear of ruining any of their relationships with players in years past?
Names.
Yeah. They're not going to decline. I'm going to give you their name. There are two people who did. One who's a longtime executive, a highly successful guy in the business.
And his name rhymes with?
And then another guy who had some troubled parts of his career that just chose not to, and I totally respect that. Everybody else was happy to kind of be part of it, and I think kind of curious how it might go. In terms of how long it took, I don't want to mislead people that might have a book inside of them. This book took 9 months. You asked it how long it took to write. I don't really consider myself a writer. I'm really a stitcher together and a curator. If people have seen my other book, Behind the Moves, or my earlier book, Behind the Moves with the NHL general managers, it's really the voice, in that case, of the GMs. In this case, it's the voice of the players. So it's really a curation of their commentary on teams, teammates, dressing rooms they've been in, where bad things creep into rooms, that kind of stuff. So it took 9 months. I've got, editors and research people and Hall of Fame people all over the place that kind of contribute to my book. So, it got accelerated. But once it started getting going, it really kind of caught a momentum. I think, especially as we played down and none of the players have seen, what the playoff brackets look like and how Terry Chris picked them. I know there's a contingent of people that there's 8 guys whose teams didn't make the playoffs in our little fantasy league, and they're printing up T-shirts that basically slander Terry Crisp. So, so we'll see how that goes.
Jason Farris with us, author of It Takes 23 to Win: Building and Being Part of Great Hockey Teams. I step all over that again. It takes 23 to win: building and being part of great hockey teams. Both this and Behind the Moves, in a lot of ways, are all about general managers, actual general managers in Behind the Moves, and wannabe general managers in this latest offering. I want to ask you about that position right now. The nature of the general manager. It is a multiple capped league right now. Once upon a time, general managers were the architects. They were the ones that put all of it together, trades and signings and all of it, weren't hamstrung by salary caps, which is the most obvious bungee cord that any general manager has. What is the art of the GM right now? When so many of your decisions are limited by what's inside the CBA, is there still art in being a general manager in the NHL?
Yeah, I think that there is. I think it's more a management job, maybe akin to what a corporate manager would do now, which is you've got such far-flung staffs, and there seem to be so many people around hockey clubs. And although there's still some mom and pop-ish type managed teams from an ownership standpoint, most of them are corporate entities. Mm-hmm. And so I think the role of the general manager has always been, but even more so is managing up. There's a lot of that, and then managing much more through delegation. I mean, it's not Pat Quinn and a secretary. And it's not just in the scouting staffs that are far-flung. It's the development teams, the guys that are developing the youth players that are tracking all those players. And then you've got, all of the physical therapy side of things, and then coaching staffs where you've got, arguably 4 head coaches on the bench and video guys and data coming in. So I think it really is much more of a managerial job. And I also think now, these guys all travel with their teams, of course, and really it's managing the personalities and the psyche of the team, game to game, win to win, loss to loss in a league that's so highly competitive that it's such a fine line.
For the longest time, outside of players who were always the stars, everybody knew who all the coaches were, and the coaches were real stars in the game. Yeah. That changed to general managers, and general managers, whether it was Sam Pollock or Torrey or Fletcher, they became legitimate stars in the game as well. Do you think we're in an era now, and maybe this has to do with CBA and labor negotiation and strife and all that, where we're starting to see, you see it in a lot of markets right now too, most recently probably Carolina, that owners are becoming more celebrities? Never as much as the players.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I think the president of hockey operations now is becoming the celebrity sometimes. I don't know about owners. I mean, you're always going to have an owner that doesn't want to have anything to do with it and wants to be as far away from the publicity as they can. And then you've always got an owner that wants to be front and center and stirring it up. So I think you're always going to have that. I don't know that the owners themselves are the stars. The owners, the dollars obviously are huge. You're attracting a group that now think they've got quite a bit of hockey knowledge, so there's a lot more involvement sometimes by owners.
The GM of the Year award is an interesting one. Personally, I think it should be renamed the Bill Torrey Award, and the trophy should be a bow tie. I love.
It is a gorgeous trophy. I
know. I
as
understand
a
that.
sculpted piece.
Also, shouldn't it be like the GM of 3 years ago gets an
so
award?
I'm with
Like-
you.
Yes.
I've actually advocated, and I've talked to various people in the league about this, that it really should be voting on a 3-year basis, and you add your scores up for the 3 years, and it's the average over the 3.
Sure.
Because the short time frame is crazy. You get a lot of early in their tenure GMs that come in and turn around something that's gone sideways and fix it up. So
When the Hawks won the Stanley Cup, even though Dale Talon had been fired, one of the GMs voted for Dale
Right.
Talon. He wasn't already wasn't employed.
Yeah.
Someone voted for Dale Talon. If there was, okay, putting you on the spot. If there was, if they renamed the award after a general manager, there have been some greats. We all know it, and you've documented so much about it and thought a lot about this. Who should they name it after? I've always lobbied for Torrey because Torrey started with this, a blank piece of paper, and turned it into a dynasty. With all due respect to Sam Pollock.
In an era where, in an era where
Torrey.
you could control your players and keep your players, right? I mean, he was able to draft all those guys. He drafted well and keep them all together. Well, let's give a real nod first. I'm going to be a history wonk here and say Tommy Gorman would be the first name I'd throw there.
Great.
The first GM and the only one since Jim Rutherford now to win a cup with multiple franchises. He actually won it with 3.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hard thing to do. Now, that was in the 30s. So I mean, I'd be hard-pressed to not say Torrey. Obviously, Sam Pollock would be one.
Those are the two that people keep gravitating towards.
Yeah.
You don't count in this one because
Yeah,
your
I'm
dad
going to
played
vote
for
for
one.
one. Yeah, Torrey seemed like a great pick. I don't know. Why are we even discussing this?
I mean, Kenny Holland, won a cup before and after the cap. That's pretty hard to do. Not a lot of guys did that. But now it's going to be, can you assemble a core group of players that have success, in their early 20s together as a group and surround them with, speed and young players. I mean, it's really that core group. You're going to, people sort of say, well, with 32 teams coming, you're going to, on average, you're going to win one every 32 years. The reality is you're going to have every decade, you're going to have a couple teams that win it 2 or 3 times, right? So you're probably going to only win it on average one every 40 teams. It's 40 years. It's really hard to win the cup.
Was there some sort of thread that, in seeing all the players that the players picked, was there a thread between all the players they picked that makes you change your perspective on how to build a team and what type of players, if you were to become a GM today, that you would pursue?
Yeah, there was a real attention to the veterans versus youth in the way these guys picked and just the dynamic that would put through a dressing room. So I think, and you see that, like, without naming names, like there are veteran players that get in rooms that know how to work a room, right? And know how to get their ice time and almost make the young guy who's taken over his job feel bad for knocking him out of the lineup, right? And,
Stewie, that's not true, is it? No, that doesn't happen.
You can't do that to
no.
this guy. This was don't you know who this player is? He should really be playing, not me. And so I think that's one. I don't think physicality is dead, and the St. Louis Blues kind of show us that. But you ask players, and they know, to your point, they know who the guys are that will put everything on the line, and maybe that's not always fighting now, but it still is a physical game, and it's a game of intimidation at some level, and a game of sticking up for each other and sticking together when it goes wrong, and so that's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah. What's your favorite GM, Stewie, from when you played?
For me, it had to be Rick Dudley.
Oh, no, okay.
Just because he went above and beyond and, sort of pulling me aside when things weren't going well. I had some GMs threaten to send me down to the minors every other week, but he actually took a special liking to me. So when I was training in Florida and he was with Atlanta, he'd come down and watch me train and ask me about my family, ask me about my family and everything like that. So I'd have to say Rick Dudley.
That is an interesting point that Anthony brings up here, Jason, because we always hear, oh, this guy's a player's coach. Oh, he's a player's coach. Oh, this guy's not a player's coach. Are there player GMs you found?
Oh, sure there are. Yeah, I think there definitely are. And communication's a big one, especially this day and age. I mean, all the players now, since they've been a youth player, I mean, they're weighing in on their, how they think a team should be run. I mean, it's a much more interactive process these days. Confidence is still such a big role in pro sports. I mean, I would think you might say the same, right? And, with a lot of young players in the league, some GMs tend to be a little more old school and, darn it, you're going to figure it out just like all the rest of us did. And then other guys are more like, hey, we're going to give you, here's some runway, like you got, we're not going to yank you off every time you fail, right? So I think there's different ways of handling that. There's, there is the CBA, but there's still ways to treat players, how you send them up and down, right?
Sure.
There's still ways how you communicate with the wives and, like all that kind of stuff. Those little things do matter.
Stewie would just see Mike Dixon in Florida, then he'd get scared because he knew that was it. Just getting on a plane.
You have to come find me in the steam room to send me down.
It seems that we talk so much about how the game's getting younger. Oh, all these young players are coming up. Kirby Doc makes it right away youngest play. We can say the same thing about GMs, can't we? And we can say the same thing about coaches, where once upon a time your general manager was in his 60s and your coach was in his 50s. Now your GM's in his 50s and your coach is probably in his 40s. There are outliers. Look at the New York Islanders.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, in your mind, and Kyle Dubas, is certainly another outlier at the other end of the spectrum, is there a sweet spot that you find talking to players for how old a general manager needs to be anymore?
No, because I think there's youthful 7-year-olds, and then there's little old doting grandmother 30-year-olds. I think it can go both ways. I think it comes to the personality, and it's not just yes, it's youth, but the ways into the league are so different now than they used to be, and that's true for players, but it's also true for GMs. Kekalainen and in Columbus. You've got coaches coming straight out of NCAA hockey now, right? So I think it's also where you're coming from that's changing a lot, but that's also reflecting who the players are and being able to relate to those players and having a network. Coaches and GMs at some point get a job because they have a network, they have relationships, they know how to, right? And so where you come from, is a reflection of who you are in the league.
30 seconds to break. Tell us all we need to know and what we need to know about It Takes 23 to Win.
Well, it's only available on my website, like all my books. This is at 23towin.com. It's a bit of a monster. It's a book you can keep coming back to time and again. Yeah.
Heavy words.
And not just is it the 23 players picking teams, but there's contributions from all kinds of people. Mark Recchi's written the forward. Kevin Westgarth, great glue guy, works for the league now, won a cup in LA, wrote a nice piece. Bob Gainey's got a great piece on the role of other kind of the secondary players.
Put Gainey on the cover too.
Yeah, it's a nice picture of the team supporting and holding up a player. But there's we feature 10 different Stanley Cup winning teams, and where we look at different parts of those 23-man lineups. There's a whole piece on the history and the evolution of the team photo, how the 23-man roster came about. There's international. Jana Hefford's in there. Cami Granato's in there. There's a whole bunch of hockey luminaries that have really weighed in, having sat in dressing rooms about what it takes to build a team. So if you're a player, a coach, assembling a team, or just a fan, I think it's something that people are going to want.
One of the things I like about you, in for a penny, in for a pound. There's no just going to sort of doubt. No. It's like the GM book.
I try to do it. So if I'm going to do this, I don't want anyone to have to go back and do this concept again. I think we try to do it right.
Best of luck with it. Thanks so
Jeff.
much for stopping by.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
All right, thanks so much. Jason Farris, our guest, former NHL executive, author of a couple of outstanding books. His most recent, It Takes 23 to Win. Also, how did you describe it? Not author, curator, puller together,
stitcher together, yeah.
Of knitter. That's right. He knits books. The other one is Behind the Moves, which is outstanding as well. Hockey Central continues. Sportsnet 590, the Fan simulcast on Sportsnet and the NHL Network.